How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue. Today is July 30th on a Tuesday here to bring you guys some more stories in and around the NFL on today's show. On the first part of the show, we're going to go over a few things, some more on Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love, talking about their new contract extensions, and bringing up a question: who is facing more pressure now after these extensions are done, now heading into 2024, who's got more weight on their shoulders to maneuver through? Then also talking about Geno Smith's recent comments about the Guardian caps, the funny looking things that players wear on their helmets during practices. They're actually allowed to wear them during the games this year, a new rule that was passed back in April. So we're going to be talking about Geno Smith considering wearing one of these Guardian caps in game, being one of the first players to do so. Those topics and more coming on later on in the show. So before I start off on Tua and Jordan Love, if you guys have any questions or comments you'd like to make, please remember to use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net. By using that link, I'm able to see your question or comment pop up on my screen. I'll read it out loud and get your guys' thoughts, your feelings on anything I say or on any of the topics on today's show. It's a big help for the show and also the network as a whole. So if you guys would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net. We greatly appreciate it here over at GMC whenever you guys are able to do that. But with that being said, we can start off on the first topic on Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love. Now, two of the top 5 highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. After last Friday, it was announced. We talked about Tua's deal, the 4-year, $212.4 million extension. He gets $53 million in salary. Then later on in the evening, we have the news breaking of Jordan Love also getting that extension. 4 years, $220 million for Jordan Love. Now he's tied in a 3-way tie with Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow for the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, earning $55 million in salary. Reshuffling the top 5 now. 3 of the quarterbacks that got extended this year, Tua and Jordan Love, along with Jared Goff, now form the new top 5 highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. So these two guys are the latest guys to get their extension. There was some difficulty, some extended period of trying to figure this thing all out, but they finally got it over the line, and now people, the media, everybody around this topic can start talking about what comes next, right? Who has more pressure on their shoulders to almost validate this contract? You know, you're getting paid like one of the top guys, the top guy in the NFL, in Jordan Love's case, you could say. So what are you going to do with that? What kind of pressures now, what kind of expectations now face Tua and Jordan Love heading right away into 2024, especially after the seasons that these guys have had? Tua showed up for himself, played like crazy last year to prove that he is worth this amount of money. Same thing with Jordan Love. He got a little bit further, but around the same value in terms of contract, total worth, and everything like that. So coming off of those strong seasons, now you get what you've always wanted. So what follows up after that? Well, to dig into more of the contract a little bit, just to discuss what could it mean for the expectations going forward. According to Pro Football Talk's Mike Florio, the goal for both Tua and Jordan Love was to make these new extensions 4 years instead of 5 years, where you see it feels like that's the typical length for a new contract extension. You always hear about the 5-year deals. Usually, that's the normal, I feel like, other than, I guess, Patrick Mahomes getting like a 10-year contract or something like that. But usually, I feel like for these market-setting contracts, it's set to 5 years, right? The teams can extend the period a little bit longer, don't have to re-enter contract negotiation talks sooner. They have that extra year by adding that 5th year onto that. But according to Mike Florio, it was a big deal for Tua and Jordan Love because not only did they have the same agency firm, Athletes First, they really wanted to keep it to 4 years because they had the leverage, like I mentioned before, in 2023, playing like some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and also their contracts were running out. They were both holding in, so the Packers and the Dolphins were a little bit in a jam here. You don't want to put this off any longer. You don't want Jordan Love just sitting on the bench watching practice instead of integrating this new offense, new scheme with him actually taking part in it. Same thing with Tua. After the season that they had last year being derailed by injuries, you just don't want Tua kind of participating in training camp. So they had all the leverage, so that's how they ended up getting these deals, I should say, over the line, 2-4 years, because it benefits the players a lot more. They don't have to wait too much longer. They're both around 24 years old, I would say, so keeping it to 4 years, they're still going to be 29, 30 years old, still at a very good age where they could get another 4-year deal at least, probably 5-year deal potentially, depending on the trajectory of their careers at that point. But this sets them up nicely to re-enter contract negotiations, and that was a big deal for them, kind of alluding back to the fact that we mentioned yesterday on why these deals were so close together in terms of announcement. Now you can kind of see where the collaboration happened a little bit here under the same agency firm and happening at the same time. But back to the question on the pressure that both of these face, who faces more? Both of them actually answered that question in some part over the last few days. Starting with Tua now, he said, "I'm the highest paid employee in this office. I got to get my whatever together. I got to get that right and get our guys moving in the direction that we need to go to be able to do those things." And Jordan Love said a similar thing, basically saying that there always is pressure on him as a first-round pick, becoming the starter, the pressures of that are on his shoulders already, and you could say he's dealt with it as well as anybody could have dealt with all three of those scenarios. And now that he's getting paid like a top end quarterback, the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, it's not something that he's necessarily not seen before, like those three examples I just mentioned. He's had to bear the pressure of all those scenarios already. So just adding on to it with a different scenario, a different circumstance, to him isn't something any different. He said there's no hiding from it. So it's not like he's avoiding the question. He knows that there's pressure. He's dealt with it already. So it seems like he feels pretty comfortable with it at this point in time. But where do I see this? Where do I feel like the most pressure is on either of these quarterbacks? I would say that there is more pressure right now on Tua. I think Tua is the clearer answer for me. I can think of more reasons why for Tua, honestly, at this point in time than Jordan Love. Because it is a little interesting how you think of it when you really break it down. I mentioned Tua as the one facing more pressure just because the record he has against the playoff teams, it's not very good. I mentioned it probably in the episode with Tua, if not yesterday, but he has a losing record basically last year and over his career against playoff teams. So that's something you don't want to see. If you're getting paid like some of the top earning guys, you have to win those big games. So that's one of the criticisms against Tua. There's also the health concerns. He's coming off a pretty healthy season, but can he consistently do that and show up each and every year? That's another thing. Not the most athletic guy in terms of quarterbacks and the Josh Allens, the Patricks, the Lamars, the Jordan Loves, but extremely accurate, very precise, and he fits this offense very well, which I thought was enough reason to give him this extension based on where the Dolphins are at this point in time in their progression to getting better, being one of those contending teams. And talking about Jordan Love also, I feel like his expectations weren't as high as Tua's, if that makes sense, right? Tua was a higher draft pick. Everybody was saying tank for Tua, and then he gets in the league, and he dealt with those injuries. There were some shaky moments, whereas with Jordan Love, he was a late-round draft pick. He was just sitting on the bench behind Aaron Rodgers. Nobody really thought he could ever live up to Aaron Rodgers, and don't you know, first year he comes in, it looks bad, and then he turns it all around, and he looks like just another quarterback that the Packers have found miraculously that could just lead them into the next decade of great quarterback play in that team. So the expectations right off the bat were set low for Jordan Love, and now that he has surpassed them, I feel like right now in the eyes of everybody, you see all the hype around Jordan Love too. I think right now he's everybody's favorite young quarterback who's going to take the league by storm. Right there with CJ Stroud, I think those two guys right now have really earn a lot of America's, love and feeling that they're going to be the next guys in this progression of quarterbacks. So with that, I feel like the heat won't come on too strong for Jordan Love right at the beginning, but not to say that he hasn't earned it. Like I said, fantastic second half of the season, great performances in the playoffs, and if you look at Jordan Love, it always feels like he has the same expression on his face. When you see him during the games, just in those moments, he doesn't really blink. It feels like the moment doesn't faze him at all, and that's something you'd love to have, a calm demeanor for everybody else in the huddle. If your quarterback's feeling calm, nonchalant about the situation, it makes everything a lot easier, and you saw that in the game against the Cowboys, how it didn't look like a playoff game, honestly, for how Jordan Love was playing out there. Same thing in the 49ers game. Unfortunately, they lost, but I just think that comes with the inexperience that Jordan Love had, and now that he can build off of that, there is some more hype there for Jordan Love. Not to say that in a way that could build some different sort of pressure for Jordan, because now you have to live up to those expectations, right? You have to live up to filling the shoes of Aaron Rodgers there in Green Bay. So in that way, if you bring that up, that's almost a different kind of pressure. You could even say more pressure for Jordan Love, just consistently maintaining that high level of performances, because now people are going to expect that with how good the Packers looked and everything like that. Whereas with Tua, we still want to see it. He was a higher draft pick, so the expectations were already set high before, and now you have to live up to those. But overall, I would say Tua has to prove it a little bit more, just because the money and equating that to big games and big game situations and winning those big games, I would say Tua has yet to prove that. Not a great record, so he has to kind of elevate his performance now to get people to buy in to him earning that contract, because right now, I think there's definitely more scrutiny around Tua and earning that contract based on all the reasons that I said, but that's how I feel about it. I'd love to know what you guys think. Who's facing more pressure in 2024? Is it Tua or is it Jordan Love? Leave your guys' thoughts in the comments section. But with that being said, we can move on to the next topic, talking about Geno Smith, some more quarterback talk on today's show. Thinking of wearing the Guardian cap on his helmet during regular season games in 2024. The NFL passed that rule now that it is an option for players to wear it if they want to. And Geno Smith is the first NFL player that I've seen talk about actually considering it. So we're going to talk about what he said and whether or not this is going too far on the side of player safety. I'm all for it, but this might be taking it a little bit too far in my opinion. So we're going to dig deeper into that when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping right back into the action on some more quarterback discussions here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Hawaiian 5-0, how you doing? Welcome to the show. But talking some more about quarterbacks in a way, but on their decision making. Talking about Geno Smith. What he said recently caught my eye for a different reason. Basically, with training camp now in full swing, you see a lot of players wearing the funny looking covers on their helmets that make their heads look twice or triple the size that it usually does. The Guardian caps is what they're called, and that was basically implemented a few years ago by the NFL in this wave of player safety, trying to keep everybody healthy, not taking as many unnecessary hits, you could say, during practice to injure them, and then they don't get to play in games, and that does no good for anybody, obviously. So that became a requirement, basically, for the NFL a few years ago. Now the players always wear them, at least the players that always have the risk of bumping heads with somebody else, like the defensive linemen, offensive linemen, cornerbacks. I've seen a few of them wear it, linebackers, running backs, all those sort of positions. Quarterbacks I'm sure can wear them, but they're not required as much for those positions. But it's funny, ironic that Geno Smith is the first person I've seen talk about this issue and considering wearing one of these Guardian caps in season here in 2024, because back in April, I want to say, the NFL passed this new mandate that it is an option now for NFL players to wear these Guardian caps in game, whereas before it was just limited to practices. You basically had to wear them in practice leading up to the game, making sure nobody was taking any unnecessary hits, keeping all your players healthy so they make it to Sunday. But now they decided that they could just make it an option for players to wear them in 2024. And even when they passed that, I know I mentioned it before in a YouTube short or on this show. Either way, I know I talked about it before, not considering it a real possibility, because I feel like the majority of the NFL players, not that they're against player safety, but they're not the most eager to follow all these rules, or they'll follow them, but they're not really happy about it. And to think that anybody would wear it during the game seemed ridiculous to me. But now Geno Smith seems to be at least considering it at this point in time, because he mentioned it last Friday during training camp, talking to the media at those practices. He mentioned how this could be an option for him heading into 2024. And I wanted to think he was kidding, but at the same time, it didn't look like it. At some point, based on this statement, he said, "I've been thinking about wearing mine. I'm still debating on if I should wear my Guardian cap. I don't know yet, but obviously I hit a lot of people with my head, so I have to be careful out there." He kept it pretty plain and simple, didn't say too much afterwards on the topic, but I think he said enough there in that statement, honestly. Again, I thought he was being sarcastic because he mentioned hitting a lot of people with his head, but a quarterback doesn't really do that. They can do that if they hit the ground hard, they get slammed or something like that, and a defensive lineman bumps them in head-to-head contact, but defensive players aren't even allowed to do that really anymore. So how much is Geno Smith actually getting hit in the head? So that's why I thought this was a little bit of a joke, but we had to talk about it because I've never heard anybody actually bring it up to the media and as an actual possibility that this could happen. And of course, the Guardian caps, I think, are a good thing. They have helped in reducing the amount of head injuries, the concussions, and things like that that players may face during a 17-game season. And now that there's talks about, elongating that to 18 games, probably eventually 19 games, maybe even 20 games at some point. But with that being the case now, the NFL's kind of throwing it out there like, all right, well, you guys can wear them. You guys can do this if you want to, knowing that this could only benefit the NFL's push to increasing the amount of games to 18, 19, if more players start wearing these Guardian caps and making the NFL a safer sport. But we're going to get onto that topic in just a second. I wanted to bring up some of these sort of stats that benefit the Brain Injury Law Center, wearing these Guardian caps and reducing the severity of some of these hits and impacts by the helmets without wearing these Guardian caps now. According to Brain Injury Law Center, wearing the Guardian cap can reduce the severity of impact by about 10%. If two players got them, it's at least 20%, obviously doubling up there. And to jump onto that, bring up more topics on that, you got the NFL Executive Vice President, Jeff Miller, who oversees player health on the NFL and just on his duties of doing that. He said that last year there has been a 52% decrease in concussions suffered by players with the Guardian caps on compared to previous seasons with 3 years in the past before that. Compared to those stats and how they compared to that, there has been a 52% decrease on that. So that's a pretty promising sign on the Guardian caps and how they've benefited up until this point. So that's not really the issue that I'm trying to bring up. that's always a positive thing. The guardian caps are going to be a great thing for players in reducing it, but kind of inching it towards now being in the NFL in the regular season games is where I kind of bring up this question: is it almost too far now, pushing it towards player safety? Touchy subject, because I don't want this to come across like I don't want players to be safe out there. This should be a barbaric game. It should be hard-nosed. Everybody's saying that football is a tough-nosed sport. Why would the NFL try to implement these rules, or why is the NFL limiting players from hitting? That always seems to be brought up by, I think, the older generation, and I'm not trying to sound like that right now, but in the same breath, I do still want to keep some sort of idea that the NFL, that football is a hard game, to play. It's a hard game. It should be a dangerous game in some aspect for some of these players. It's not an easy sport. It's a dangerous sport in that aspect, and they're just trying to make it in a situation where the NFL is completely going in a different direction. I think it's a weird thing. Like I mentioned, I don't want to bring up player safety too much, like I'm totally against it, but the guardian caps, I believe, are a good thing. It should be a positive thing for these players. But again, talking about this, I don't think it should be to a point where it should be required by any sense. I have no problem if Gino wants to wear it, is considering wearing it just because he wants to be safe. But I feel like in this push for player safety now, the looming question of the NFL trying to implement 18 games, maybe 19 games, just trying to make this bigger, I feel like this is just an introduction into almost making it a requirement. No, I'm thinking ahead to how the NFL could play this out in a way, just because now they're introducing it as an option. So how much longer is it going to be before they almost make it a requirement? And then at that point, it almost really just becomes a weird thing with the NFL, where now they're almost just trying not to make it football, right? If that makes sense. You're going to hear a lot of players complaining about it if it becomes a requirement, and that's definitely a long ways away from ever happening. This is just the beginning steps, but I'm sort of projecting now, seeing where the NFL is really coming from by making this an optional thing. And it could be a benefit, like I said, if Gino wants to wear it, someone like Tua, who has suffered from injuries to his head already early on, that can be understandable if they want to consider wearing it. Maybe they wear it a game, they don't for a couple weeks, and they wear it again. Maybe they wear it coming off of a head injury, something like that. That makes sense, but I think that's as far as it should go. I don't want this going to a point where, again, it's a requirement by the NFL. And now Gino, again, has put it out there in the air now, so I wouldn't be surprised if more players come out and say that maybe they're considering it, or maybe that they are going to do it at some point. So now we're getting closer into this area where the NFL can push player safety even more in order to get those extra games, 18 games, 19 games in a season, which is where I think this will ultimately go, but I hope it doesn't become a requirement for these players. Also, with the NFL also working with helmet design manufacturers recently, they've already started to design these new helmet designs, these new helmet models, basically to protect against head injuries already. So I don't know, if you're doing that, you're going to the lengths of that already. I don't feel like the guardian caps necessarily should be brought into the regular season. That's just how I feel about it. If you're trying in other areas to make it safe, why still make the guardian caps a requirement? That's one thing. Also, like I said, I think it would be too far in one direction of trying to be over safe with the NFL. Really not making it football anymore at that sense. Basically playing with a pillow on your head. You're already taking away enough rules from the defensive side of the ball, really, to make it a lot safer. So this would just really be overdoing it, in my opinion. But the last thing I would say, just on a more lighthearted note, I don't think people would take the NFL as serious anymore if they had these guardian caps on their head. It would almost, I don't want to say it becomes a joke, the NFL becomes a joke or anything like that, but it just looks funny. It just looks ridiculous. And they could try to customize them or make them look cool, I guess. But it's not the same, obviously, with wearing that thing on your head, covering up the logos. Of course, they could put it on the outside of the cap. But again, it just doesn't look the same. Their heads overall already look a little bigger with the helmet on. You make it look a little bit more, even more bigger. It looks funny. It just looks weird. It's something that when you look at it through the TV, it almost looks comical in a way. And I don't think the NFL wants to portray that image really out there to everybody else watching the NFL, looking onto it. I think that's also another reason why this really shouldn't go too much further than just being an option, but it's out there now. Geno Smith was the first player I've seen to talk about it. I'll probably expect more players to talk about it, honestly, but we'll see how this kind of snowballs and how quickly it picks up, honestly, over the next few weeks, months heading into 2024. But certainly something interesting that I was not expecting seeing on my feed in these recent days. But who knows? We're going to see where it goes from there. But on that note, we're going to move on to the next set of topics on today's show, talking about Deebo Samuel wanting to try out his hand on kickoffs in 2024, and Micah Parsons making some more comments regarding Malik Hooker and his comments that he made on Micah Parsons' focus level in regards to football and focusing on his own podcast with Bleacher Report. That builds on after Micah Parsons' latest comments. We're going to get to those two after we take a short break here. We'll be right back after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the new kickoff format and Deebo Samuel specifically wanting to try his hand now with this new format for the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to get our first look at this new kickoff format in just a couple of days now on Thursday when the Hall of Fame game goes on August 1st between the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears on Thursday. Unfortunately, no Caleb Williams or most of the starters, so that's a bummer, but regardless, we get some football back at least, so we'll take the good with some of the bad. But we're going to talk about Deebo, focusing on Deebo and the 49ers because he brought up this idea of wanting to try his hand out in kickoffs. You usually don't see the stars, the most important players out there because before, up until this point, the kickoffs were pretty dangerous, a situation where you didn't want Deebo taking unnecessary hits, unnecessary amount of contact when already in the game he was lining up in the backfield as a receiver already. They are a little bit more protected now with the rules, but regardless, you don't want them out there when you don't necessarily need them to be. But now, this new format has made the kicking game not only a bit more relevant, but a lot more significant in the turnout of some of these games. And that's what the NFL wanted to do. They don't want this to be just some traditional, irrelevant part of football. I like that they changed this. I'm a big fan of it. But now seeing this, you kind of have more incentive to go out and get yourself a Deebo, a Cordell Patterson, some of these return specialists, hopefully to give you an advantage in these games. And on the topic on being more involved in these kickoffs, on the topic of trying to get more out of this aspect of the game now, Deebo Samuel mentioned this on the possibility of being more involved in it. And he said, I wouldn't mind doing it from the get-go. I'm a team-first player. So if Kyle was like, hey, man, we don't want you to do it full-time. We just use you whenever we really need it. I'm fine with that. But if you want to use me full-time, I'm all for that as well. And Deebo has some experience with kickoffs. You know, he's returned 9 kickoffs before in his NFL career. Not a lot, but, you know, he at least has done it at a time where it was a lot more dangerous, a lot more free-flowing, less structure to it. So he averaged about 25.9 yards per return. So not too bad with getting the ball back to the 25 at least. So right now he sees it as a pretty great opportunity, really, where you could get a big advantage in his terms, where the receiving team, if they make a guy miss with the amount of set blocks that there are out there, pretty much it's almost 8 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10, a situation where you're going to get to the kicker at some point, and then at that point, I'm going to take Deebo against any kicker trying to tackle him. That's just a matter of fact. So there is some room there for excitement if you're the 49ers, because now, obviously, they have all this talent on their roster. They have an excess of talent, honestly, with Deebo, Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle on one side of the ball. And sometimes you can't get everybody the ball on that side. You can't get everybody 4 catches, 5 catches if you're a pass catcher, 20-plus carries for Christian McCaffrey, then involving him in the passing game. Not everyone is going to be satisfied. Not everyone's going to put up the stat line that you might expect from some of these guys based on their elite level. Now, I think with Deebo, this is exactly what he needed, not only for his benefit, but for the 49ers' benefit also, to take advantage of everybody on every side of the ball that they can, to distinguish themselves a little bit more from the Lions, the Packers, the Eagles, the Cowboys even. You have at your disposal a very unique, special player in Deebo that is already a nightmare to try and tackle. Now you put him on kickoffs where he's more involved. He can have the ball more in his hands, not just on offense where it's all predicated on the quarterback and just how everything, plays out from a defensive standpoint and everything like that. Now you could almost get him the ball a lot more during the game on kickoffs. If you get scored on, at least he gets the ball now more in his hands. But this is just another dynamic that I think Deebo adds, where this is exactly, like I mentioned, what Deebo's looking for and what the 49ers could really use. Because before we talked about, I mentioned this hypothetical scenario a few shows ago with Devontae Adams, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo. There was some rumors, this story I saw, where there were some considerations in trading Deebo and paying Brandon Ayuk as a possible solution to this whole situation with Brandon Ayuk and his contract. If you can't all fit it into the salary cap, why not trade Deebo? Because the idea behind that was that Deebo in the running game, that was the unique ability, right? That was what made him so special at that point in time. Adding to that running game, lining up in the backfield, being very good at it from that standpoint as well. Bringing that to the 49ers offense kind of got diminished a little bit now with Christian McCaffrey coming in, and it's not a bad thing, but you just don't have Deebo back there as much as you would maybe like to, and from that standpoint, it kind of takes away from that special ability that Deebo brought to the table. But now, when you have this whole new dynamic on the new kickoff returns and Deebo willing to do it, I think this is the perfect situation, because now you get the ball in Deebo's hands a lot more, like I said, and it's pretty much like running the ball anyway, like trying to set up the blocks on the kickoffs, trying to pick the right hole to run through, manipulating the coverage teams and stuff like that. He already has some experience in a similar scenario with running the ball, and now he can bring that to the kickoff, side of things, and I think it will be very beneficial for the 49ers and Brandon Ayuk to, show the 49ers that he could bring this other level to their team, to their goal of trying to make themselves the best team in the NFL. And that's where I think this is a no-brainer for the 49ers to actually make this go. But again, you kind of see the hesitancy from Shanahan, maybe not wanting to do this every single time, but having him back there, at least the sight of Deebo Samuel back there would change the coverage a little bit. It will change the way that the kicking team, plays a kick, fields a kick, where they kick it to on that side of the ball. It changes a lot of things. So I think it would be such a huge advantage, even more, for the 49ers to do that with Brandon Ayuk, or not with Brandon Ayuk, with Deebo Samuel. And it just allows Deebo to be that unique player again. And then, thinking long-term, if you're Deebo and you add this to your resume of what you can bring to a negotiating table, depending on how this new kickoff format sort of plays out and how much more of an advantage it could be, and how it plays out in 2024, you could bring that to the negotiating table, say, look, not only am I a great receiver, you can line me up in the backfield, I've done that before, but also in the kickoff field as a returner, I'm this good when you put me back there when I'm behind a good set of blocks and we have a good kickoff return unit. I'm able to do this, and that way maybe he gets some more money out of the 49ers from that. Maybe he moves on from the 49ers and he gets a bigger contract somewhere else because he could bring that different dimension to a different team. So that's where all this potential lies with this new kickoff format. Not only more exciting for fans to see some more kickoffs, hopefully how electrifying that is, but also for the 49ers to take advantage of this, to fully use all of their weapons at any time in the game, but also as an overall sport, having guys be more important to the outcome of the game, not just a great quarterback, great defensive players, great wide receivers. You had this whole new area that has been sort of dormant for the last 2 years, 3 years. You have new players, popping up, being difference makers. And if you have someone like Deebo at your disposal, why not use him in this dimension? I think it would be a great idea. The 49ers should take advantage of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. I think this would be great for them. How much, do they do it? That depends on them. And maybe they get some other guys out there. Maybe they try Elijah Mitchell out there. Maybe Christian McCaffrey. It's an idea. I highly doubt he goes out there. But, with the circumstance and everything like that, depending on if you need a good return, if it's late in the game, you want to have McCaffrey out there, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle out there as a blocker. You have so much room to really be creative with this new kickoff format, and I'm excited to see how much teams actually show in the Hall of Fame game. I saw Doug Peterson mention something that he doesn't expect too many teams to kind of show their hand in what they're really trying to do, so hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we see something exciting here, but during the regular season, if the 49ers decide to do this, I think it would just distinguish them even more as one of the top teams if they have really a difference maker on offense with all the guys that I mentioned. On defense, they're lights out. And now in the kicking game, you have Deebo in there as well. It's hard to find a weakness with this team. It really is. But that's pretty much everything that Deebo had to say on this situation. Let me know what you guys think. Is this a good idea? Should Deebo want to do this? Is this too big a risk? Please leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box or also the comment section after this video. But that'll do it for that segment. We have 2 more to talk about. Like I mentioned, bringing up Micah Parsons' recent comments on Malik Hooker again, on the bigger situation around Malik Hooker's previous comments on Micah Parsons' podcast and his level of focus on football and that podcast. And also, we'll talk about Jaylen Warren, the Pittsburgh Steelers running back, who has been impressing at training camp so far, and whether or not Jaylen Warren's recent rise to stardom is more of an incentive to maybe feel better about moving on from Najee Harris, or should it be more of an incentive to keep this great duo together for years to come in Pittsburgh by extending Najee Harris? I'll provide that scenario later on in the show, but for right now, we're going to hit a break, and when we return, we're going to talk about Micah Parsons and his comments on Malik Hooker.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to revisit a previous topic that we talked about, I think now weeks, maybe months ago now at this point, having to do with Micah Parsons and his teammate Malik Hooker, because before the story was that Malik Hooker had some comments that he made on, it was Keyshawn Johnson's podcast on Micah Parsons and his podcast that he does called The Edge on Bleacher Report, and just how that might affect his level of focus on the defense, on, just focusing all in on football. Everybody wants the football players, obviously, to be fully focused on football, have that be their number one priority, and it should be that way. But now you see some of these players, Micah, Draymond Green, it seems everybody has their own podcast, right? They're now venturing into careers, other avenues during their playing career for after their playing career and, setting themselves up for that. But with that comes the scrutiny, with that comes the doubts of some players, some people thinking that it takes away from the full focus that they want to have on their football team, especially with the Cowboys and the spotlight that's always on them. The last thing you want to do is having one of your star players not be fully invested in trying to get this Cowboys team to the standard, to the heights that everybody expects them to get to. So that was the problem before. We brought that up, what Malik Hooker said, what Micah Parsons, sort of responded to that on Twitter, which was later deleted. But recently, just last week, Malik Hooker and Mike McCarthy talked about it again, and they said that there was no issue between Malik and Micah Parsons, so that was great. I don't know why they brought it up again, but a good response by both of them, right? But Micah was also asked about it, and he didn't really keep it short and sweet. He had a pretty extended quote that he brought up about the whole situation that I thought was, pretty telling on where his thoughts were at, on where he was thinking about where this whole situation has gone with Malik Hooker and himself, obviously. He said, "I know what I do in my free time, so make sure you're hopping on the edge if you get a chance on Monday and Tuesday nights." What he does on his Monday and Tuesday nights when he's not in the building, that's on him. What I do, that's me and my business and my family, so I'm going to keep it at that. It's no misunderstanding. It's plain as day. What it was, it is what it is. Everything was said. Everything was said. From that point, there is more to unpack with Micah Parsons and how he feels. Clearly, he still feels a certain way about it, and I don't want to say he should, because it wasn't something that should have been said, really from the get-go. That's how I feel about it. This should have never been said by Malik Hooker. It was something that, everybody always says, just airing out your dirty laundry, keeping everything in-house. It was so unnecessary at that point in time, and Malik Hooker sort of defended himself on his comments. He said that he meant no harm by them, that it was sort of all overblown, but yes and no, because it was overblown, but at the same time, it should have never been said. And the fact that it was said and the fact that Micah responded to it, you kind of had to know that this could have been a possibility. At worst case scenario, that Micah responds, he's upset about it, and now this becomes a whole public thing when really it could have just been kept as a conversation between yourself and Micah Parsons. If you really feel that strongly about it, why not go to Micah? Why not go to Micah first and try to settle the whole thing between him and yourself, not just say it to somebody else, but say it on a public platform and have Micah find out about it that way. That's probably the worst thing you could have done. And now everybody, not only do you get Micah's response, but now everybody has a comment to make about it. Everybody gives their opinion about it. And already Micah was sort of facing some heat during the season. You already knew that Micah was facing some of these critics will say about having this podcast. And now, heading into this year, Micah's role with Bleacher Report is set to grow after he was named the president of Bleacher Report Gridiron, their football subsection. So you're not really sure. I don't have too much clarity on if that means that Micah's going to have more things to do. That's the guess, that's the prediction, that he has this promotion, so he's probably going to have more responsibilities. So you can have some doubts about it then. But if you're Malik Hooker, it's not like you didn't know. People were already commenting on Micah and his podcast already. So to say this at a time, especially at a time where in the offseason where nothing is really going on, you really have to dig to find stories to talk about, you just threw it up there, a perfect layup, a perfect lob for anybody to take it and run with it, dunk on Micah Parsons with what you had to say. So really unnecessary from the get-go, and Micah clearly still feels a certain way about it. I don't want to say attacked, but it must be just really awkward if they're still locker mates in that locker room with Micah Parsons now saying these comments. And it shouldn't have been something that should have ever aired, honestly, because Malik Hooker is, questioning somebody else's business, and then that gets all sort of touchy and sensitive when you go into that area. So that's another thing that just adds on to why this should never have been said. And then also, it's not like Malik Hooker was really involved in the show or anything like that. It's almost completely irrelevant to him, sort of. The connection that he has is having Micah as a teammate, having Micah as somebody that he's very dependent on, the entire defense is dependent on the level of success that they will have. So bringing it up as a potential, almost outlet for other people to kind of think this is a distraction, now it becomes a whole different thing. It becomes a whole different issue just outside of you having your doubts about this, going to Micah and saying, yo, I feel that you might be, straying off in a way. You could use whatever verbiage you'd want to use, but this definitely could have been handled easier. And now, again, you just, soft pitch it to a lot of people to now give their opinions on it. And it just becomes irrelevant to football. Everyone's talking about other things now, and it's a distraction, really, is what it is at the end of the day. You hate to say that the Cowboys just almost do this to themselves, but it is almost what they do. You bring up all these extra things, the contract negotiations, this unnecessary stuff. It's just almost piling up season after season. There's always something with the Cowboys, and we're just never only just talking about football with them. But with Micah, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, he's had this podcast for, I think, at least last season, I want to say. I don't know if he did it before then, but it's not like it affected him too much last year. He still had a decent season for his standards. He still was, without a doubt, their best player on that side of the ball. So, if it didn't affect him last year, of course he has that promotion now, but I don't know what could have led to maybe you thinking that this is going to be a different thing, a different outcome this year around. So that's really my question I would ask to Malik Hooker as to why he would have said something like this. But the fact that Micah also, records this on an off day, usually when it's slower at the beginning of the week, is another reason why, this doesn't really scream like a big situation, like a big distraction to me. It's just a hobby. If you really think about it, players do whatever they want to do. They should do whatever they want to do, unless it's, a league or something like that. What they do on their off day shouldn't really concern anybody, and even including their teammates. If they're just staying in line and they're showing up, doing their job, what they do outside of it, it doesn't really or shouldn't really concern anybody else. But Malik Hooker just made it easier for a lot more people to talk about it. So now Micah not really helping the situation either by commenting on it again. But it is where it is now. We'll see if that has any impact on their dynamic, on the defense's, camaraderie or anything like that. But we'll see how that all plays out. They definitely have bigger issues to get to this offseason, apart from just talking about Micah's podcast and this being a distraction. They have a lot more things to get through on that to-do list before we get to this being a serious issue. But that's that. Micah Parsons brought it up again. I thought I'd bring it up again also to give my thoughts on what he said. But that'll do it for that segment. One more topic to get to on today's show. A question I wanted to bring up with Jaylen Warren impressing recently at the Steelers training camp last week and heading into this week. Is this more of an alibi now to feel more comfortable on potentially losing Najee Harris, or should this be more of an incentive to not want to lose Najee Harris and break up that great running back duo you have if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers? What Mike Tomlin said on Jaylen Warren and just overall how this, impacts the Steelers and how they've built up their team. I thought it was something to bring up based on how Jaylen Warren's performing. So we're going to get to dissecting all of that in just a few seconds. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining me back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to go over this last sort of training camp update scenario that I wanted to bring up because of this update on Jaylen Warren and recently impressing at the Steelers training camp. The Steelers have been going at it now since last Thursday, I want to say. So they've had, I want to say, their fifth practice today, their first practice in pads today, and one of the biggest standouts has been Jaylen Warren. After the Steelers' third day of practice, one thing that was standing out to people already, the local media and just people reporting on their practices, was that Jaylen Warren, and specifically his conditioning levels, got a lot of people's attention. Warren, after that practice, said that he indeed has a lot more just energy about him. He feels a lot more in shape, and that he is very happy with how this offseason has worked out for him in terms of just being in better condition to face this training camp this year in the NFL. And also Mike Tomlin has also taken notice to it. He was asked about it, and he said, "I think conditioning and things of that nature get revealed the more we keep working, and they have to put consecutive days together. But obviously, by the looks of him, he's done some nice work." So getting some praise from Mike Tomlin is always a great thing. Jaylen Warren, to add on to that, he said he credited, the way he's looking, the way he's feeling in terms of his physical shape to the training that he did with Total Athlete Training, and also former Minnesota running back Matt Asiata for their help and getting him to how he's looking right now, because he feels like the better conditioning that he's in, focusing more on running this offseason instead of just lifting, has helped him get to the shape that he is in right now. And to that, he said, "I feel like I'm able to run all day." He said it helps maintaining his level of focus without having to deal with the fatigue and the tiredness of an NFL game. The more he's conditioned, the more energy he has. He feels that he can be closer to 100%, giving his best effort rather than dealing with just feeling tired and giving a half tank of effort rather than the full thing. And that's one of the things that Jaylen Warren brings, right, is that energy, spotting Najee Harris, splitting their carries, having him come in fresh with, this whole bunch of energy coming in that just punches you straight in the mouth. If you're a linebacker and you're already dragging with a long drive, to have a new running back come in and just run you over is awful. It's an awful feeling. I can't imagine what that's like, but that's what Jaylen Warren brings, and that's what the Steelers want to take advantage of this year in 2024, and what they've been trying to build up for the last few years now with all the just switching that they've had to do on offense with their coordinators. Now, that's pretty impressive. That's a good sign if you're the Steelers wanting to continue this into 2024, because if you look at last year, Jaylen Warren produced 1,154 total yards on 210 carries, touches of the ball with some receptions. So that's a pretty significant chunk of the offense that goes his way. Also leading the team with 5.3 yards per carry, and that only added to forming this great duo that he had with Najee Harris. Both of them very good at what they do. Both of them very hard to tackle. Both of them very aggressive and in your face when they're running at you as an opposing defense. And they formed one of the best running back duos, in my opinion, a biased opinion, the best running back duo in the NFL, just watching them as a Steelers fan. And with all the offensive improvements that they've made already, drafting Troy Fautanu, adding Isaac Seumalo last year, drafting Zach Frazier also this year. Now you have Najee and Jaylen Warren to benefit. After all of that, they could even become the 8th duo to each run for over 1,000 yards as a running back duo in a season. They could become the 8th duo to do that. So I think they're able to do that. They're capable of doing that. But now the question becomes, for some people, I think it will become a bigger question later on in the season, depending on where this offense goes, and the level of success that Jaylen Warren has specifically, based on how impressive he's looked right now. I think the question will become whether or not people feel comfortable enough with having Jaylen Warren now be the number one running back, because I still believe that people still believe that Najee is that number one and that Jaylen is the number two, that they split carries, but Najee is still the lead back. Once the season starts, and if Jaylen Warren carries this success into the regular season, I think it's almost inevitable for people to start bringing up the scenario of maybe the Steelers don't need Najee. If they have Jaylen Warren, could you imagine Jaylen Warren being the number one, not having to split carries, how much better he could be? That's going to be, I think, a discussion that it's just inevitable at this point with whenever you have great players like this. We brought it up with Debo and Brandon Ayuk. With these two guys also, there's always a discussion about who's the number one, who's the lead guy, and I think it's almost inevitable at this point. And could this mean, especially if the Steelers don't re-sign Najee before the start of the regular season, I feel like it could become more of a freaking conversation that people bring up about Najee just moving on, the Steelers moving on from Najee and making Jaylen Warren their number one running back. Also with the narrative around running backs, also on just how people, organizations feel like they just grow on trees, drafting the next best one, a younger one that gives you around the same production. I feel like that's just almost going to grow into the topic surrounding these two guys. But to me, I feel like it should be more of an incentive, more of a feeling around that conversation, around that question too, instead of trying to get rid of Najee and feeling safe with Jaylen Warren as your lead back. I mentioned it before on prior episodes how the NFL, I think, is shifting just more into this running back by committee, running back duos across the NFL. No longer do you just see one guy be the bell cow. It's hard to find that and have it be a sustainable level of production year in and year out, because inevitably the running backs do take a lot of hits, do take a lot of punishment, so their bodies are going to get fatigued by definitely week 11 or something like that. And also depending on where your bye week is. Also, if you have an early bye week, then the rest of it is awful. The consecutive games you have to do as a running back, you get guys injured and you hardly ever see it. You're starting to see more running back duos pop up with the Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs, and David Montgomery. The Steelers obviously have something going. Nick Chubb, even Jerome Ford now with the season that he had last year. The Rams with Kyron Williams and Blake Corum now. I'm sure the 49ers would love to spot Christian McCaffrey even more, because that's a situation also to kind of tie into this where you have that lead back. He's phenomenal all throughout the regular season, and he stayed healthy pretty much in the playoffs, but there were those issues that popped up where he had some nagging injuries, the calf injury that kept him out of the Washington game and just other games as well. So you don't want that to be a scenario where you look to your bench and you have no idea who's going to give you what because you've never tried it out before. That's where I think the NFL is going to, and the fact that this is going to become a question, I think it should be more of a question that the Steelers should want to keep Najee. If Jaylen Warren is going to be this good, why not have another guy be just as good to add to this running game? Because the way that the Steelers have built this run-first offense, they have been developing it for some time now, drafting guys, signing guys from free agency, and you bring in Arthur Smith, who is known and having success for this running game, especially in Atlanta, where the offense, say what you want about it, the running game of that offense was very good, with Bijan having the season that he did, even Tyler Algier looking impressive. No one can tell me they knew who Tyler Algier was before Arthur Smith came in there and made him a star. I think the same thing is going to happen here. Because Jaylen and Najee have already been successful, it's the ideal situation for Arthur Smith to pick it up and just make it even better. And if Jaylen Warren has a phenomenal year, they both get 1,000 yards, again, it shouldn't be a reason to just throw Najee away and think that you're going to just be as successful with just Jaylen Warren, because the way that Arthur Smith runs his offense, you shouldn't want to get rid of one half of what makes you a great offense in Najee Harris just because Jaylen is growing, developing into a number one running back. It might mean that you have to pay both guys, and that becomes a problem, right? That's the biggest problem with having to pay maybe Najee $9-10 million, and then Jaylen Warren also feeling that he deserves that much. It's something unprecedented now in the NFL, paying, forget about one running back that much, paying two of them double digits. It would be considered lunacy in this day and age in the NFL. But you get to cross that bridge when you get there, right? You get to face that problem when you get to Jaylen Warren's extension. But for right now, I think they should do whatever they can to keep this duo together. They've already built in and bought into this run-first offense, so trying to move away from it and, fishing for another replacement for Najee if you do decide to move on from him just because Jalen is showing promising signs. I don't think that's the right mindset to have. Having both of them together, I think, would only benefit the Steelers with the circumstances that they face right now. They're not in a position with not knowing really who the number one quarterback is, having doubts about the wide receivers outside of George Pickens. They're not in a position right now to throw the ball 40 at this point in time. So that's where I think this narrative should go, where the answer should go to that question of whether or not people should feel confident about the Steelers moving on from Najee just because Jalen Warren is impressing. I don't like that mindset. They should keep both of them. That's how I feel about it. Najee has only produced 1,000-yard seasons since he's been in the NFL, and he doesn't get talked about that much because of the fact that the Steelers' offense has been atrocious up until this point, but maybe they're turning the corner a little bit. That's me being optimistic, but that's how I feel about it. Having both of them would only benefit the Steelers' offense, so I think keeping both of them would be in their best interest, but they have other negotiations to get to, Cam Hayward being one of them. Pat Freiermuth also very big contributors to this team, so how the Steelers manage those priorities will be something to keep an eye on in the weeks to come. But that'll wrap it up. That'll do it for today's show. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to catch more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, to see all forms of media content around the NFL surrounding this show. As a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions, more open conversations about the NFL with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me. I'll see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.